It's been raining all day today. It's been very gloomy, and therefore I think it's the perfect opportunity to talk about some books. I read very slow, therefore this year I've only read about 25 books or so, which for me is a lot. It's probably more books that I've read in my whole life. I have a little pile here. All these 6 books are my 5-star reads. So the way that I rate my books is, it's kind of hard to explain. This book made me cry because I absolutely love crying, and if it sort of eludes the sort of emotion within me, I feel like I just cannot give it less. Unless I cry from how bad the book is, but that hasn't happened yet. I'm either like shocked to my core, I can't put it down, because there's some periods in this past year when I do feel like reading is a little bit of a chore, but like if I'm excited to continue reading, if I like can't wait to get home from school or whatever and continue reading, while reading it I'm thinking about it, and after reading it, if I constantly think about it and even months after reading I still think about it. And since this is quite a new hobby, I've been reading a lot of recommendations that I've seen from TikTok and YouTube, so I'm kind of trying to broaden my reading spectrum, but currently the stuff I've read is probably something you've all heard about before. This falls into the category of a book that just made me sob. Insert picture. Throughout the book you kind of could sense that the ending was gonna hurt. Although I finished it like 2 days ago, I can already say I'm gonna think about this constantly. So this is a story about Nazi Germany, and this whole story is from Death's point of view, and pretty much this whole story bases around this girl who's 11 years old and she's taken in by a foster family in Germany. I almost gave up on it because the start is quite slow. It took me a while to get into it. It took me about like 150 pages to get into it, but once you get over that you really want to continue reading it, and it just I don't know, some nights I just could not stop. And even though this gave me a little bit of a thick book anxiety, I finished it. This next one is probably my favorite book I've read so far. I bought this book because I've just seen it around, and sometimes if my bookstore doesn't really have books, I just buy something that I've seen somewhere, and this was one of those, and I didn't read it for months. I didn't know what it was about, and I was kind of intimidated by the fact that it's like kind of Shakespeare based. Honestly, once I started reading this, could not stop. I finished like the last over 100 pages before I went to Italy back in May, and even though I had to wake up for the plane at like 4 a.m. I just stayed up until like 2 a.m. to finish this because I just couldn't put it down, and to this day it's one of my favorite books. I think about it constantly. I skipped over some of the Shakespeare part because I just don't understand Shakespeare. Like I can read the whole paragraph and I will not know what I just read, so it's kind of pointless in that way, but I skipped over the Shakespeare part and it still crushed my heart. This story is about like 7 friends. They go to like this performance arts school and they all do theater. That's why like Shakespeare is involved. One of them is killed, one of them is charged for it and put in prison, and we sort of find out what happened. I think about it all the time. So this is the 5-biggest 5 stars I can possibly give. So next one is a bit more fun, not as depressing maybe as the first 2. It's Daisy Jones and the Six. This whole thing is just like a big interview pretty much, and it's fascinating to read. I don't know, the last like quarter of it just crushed me. Not to the point where I cried, but I was very close to crying. Basically, it's just about a band in the 70s. That's pretty much it. And the reason why I give it 5 stars is because I feel like the writing was so good. And not because like it was beautifully written like a poem, but it was just like so... You read and you just see a perfect picture in your head. Like you read and you just see the characters. You can almost hear the songs. it's just captivating. It's amazing, this book. People have been really hating on Colleen Hoover lately, but this is the only one of her books that I've given 5 stars, because this is the book that I've read the quickest, that I was the most shocked by, that I just could not put down, and I kind of had to control myself not to read it in one day, because I can't afford to buy that many books, so I can't really afford to even read a book in like 2 days. So I read this in like 3 or 4. So this is a book about a writer who has this opportunity to kind of be a ghost writer for this really famous writer. She's invited to do the job by the famous writer's husband, and just shit goes down. I know people say this is predictable. I don't know if I'm naive or stupid, but every single page was a shock to me. So this does include a lot of triggers, so I would probably recommend you to check them out, because it was quite graphic at some points. When I first bought this book, it was not as popular as it is now. Now it's like the talk of the town, but back then I pretty much just bought it because I heard one person on TikTok talking about it, and I really liked the cover. It's Alone with You in the Ether. I just can't stop thinking about this. I think I read it in like late spring, so that was months ago, and I kind of want to forget it because I really want to read this again, because it was a journey, it was like an experience. It didn't make me cry, it didn't have the feeling that you can't put it down, but it was the first book that was absolutely just mesmerizing and so beautifully written that I was just absolutely blown away by it. And usually I don't prefer books like that because English is my second language. It's just too complicated sometimes for me to read if it's like too beautiful. It's pretty much about 2 people who meet in Chicago and decide to have 6 conversations to get to know each other. One of them is an artist, the other one of them is a mathematician, so you can imagine how differently they see and view the world. It was so interesting to get to know them, to hear their thoughts, their opinions, and how they just communicate. And so for that reason I give this 5 stars, because I feel like this is a book you can keep forever and keep rereading it. And this is the first and only book I ever annotated. There's just never gonna be anything like it ever again. And last but not least, a book that made me cry the most, and that's why I love it just as much. I know, basic TikTok book. Just absolutely broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. I sobbed like a baby. I just can't explain the experience of reading this. I do not understand anything about this Greek mythology, but that didn't stop me from just devouring this book. And I think this is just the saddest thing I've ever read, and that's why I love it so much. So yeah, this is basically just a story about the Trojan War. It's just very sad. It's just very sad. And although this was one of those books that's like too beautifully written for me to completely understand, it still didn't take away from the story, and I still cried my eyes out. So yeah, these are all the books I rated 5 stars. So please, if you have anything similar to any of these, please let me know. I just want to sob every chance I get.